Here and glad you've spent your time this morning with us. So let's go ahead and get started for those of you who are on time. I want to read a quote to start us off. Because of the Room to Read program, what used to happen later in grade 4 and grade 5 was when the students started to learn to read fluently. Because of Room to Read and their library program, from grade 1, they can read the story. From grade 1, they can decode and they can read fluently. It's in grade 1 that they can write now because of the instruction in the daily library. This is a quote from the SERI program in Room to Read SERI program in India. And basically, we want to learn from organizations like Room to Read and programs like SERI that will tell us how to do this. How do we rapidly increase the time and the amount of learning that children get? So these how-to guides we're talking about today on structured pedagogy will discuss the how of programs. It's not just describing SERI and programs like it, it's showing how to get there. What are the steps that we as policymakers, we as donors, we as implementers, researchers should do to improve the effectiveness of our foundational literacy and numeracy programs, and how do we get there so we get results like that program there. So let's walk through our agenda. The first thing we're going to have on our agenda is an introduction to the Science of Teaching grant by Dr. Asia Kazmi, who's the Global Education Policy Lead for the Gates Foundation. After Asia, we'll hear from Michael Crawford, who's a lead education specialist on the World Bank's work with accelerator countries and the particular emphasis on improving reading outcomes. I'll talk a bit about structured pedagogy itself, and then we'll have the discussion on the specific how-to guides that have been developed from Joe DeStefano, who's a senior director for policy systems and governance, for Dr. Peggy Duback, who's a senior literacy researcher, and Dr. Wendy Ryland-Gita, who's a senior education advisor. So you're going to get a lot on these guides from them. We'll then turn to the donor and policymaker perspectives from Dr. Stephen Taylor from the South African Department of Basic Education, as well as Rebecca Rhodes, who's at USAID, the Center of Education. Then we'll spend as much time as we can on Q&A and closing remarks. So we really do want your participation and your thoughts as we get going. So we'll make sure we have enough time at the end to hear from you. So let's go ahead and get started to our first discussion from Dr. Asia Kazmi. Asia.
Hi, thank you very much, Ben, and thank you for the opportunity, and special thank you to the 300 or so people who have joined to really learn together about the science of teaching and learning. And I want to just take a few moments to reflect on this picture. It's by Amina Jashu from the Tusome program. And when you look at her face, it really captures for me what teaching and learning is about, that confidence, that joy, that liveliness, and that enthusiasm to learn. But where she is born will determine what her future is. And if she was born in a high-income country, the chances are 9 out of 10, she'll be one of the 9 out of 10 children who will be able to read by the age of 10. If she's born in a low-income country, she is likely to be of the 9 out of 10 who cannot read by the age of 10. That is a shocking statistics, and that is the focus of our work in the global education team in the foundation, and the focus of the science of teaching work, about getting an understanding of what does it take in classrooms, in teaching and learning, to have more children learning. So when I joined the education sector about a decade ago, coming from a high-income country education background, I was surprised at perhaps how little pedagogical discourse there is on how much focus there is on teaching and learning. And there are people doing this, and I think USAID particularly has been leading the field on this. But there is a need for a more intentional focus on pedagogy, recognizing that there's a technical expertise in what teachers do in the classroom that needs to be articulated, and a shared vocabulary about what effective teaching and learning is. And we want to also not just talk about the broad picture. So today we are going to be talking more broadly about structured pedagogy, but over the course of the Science of Teaching program, get down to the micro components of teaching. For example, how do we help improve teachers' questioning skills, explanations, and particularly how do they support children who are at risk of falling behind. So we're not just saying we want to improve teaching, we're more precise about how to improve teaching. The third aspect we're really keen on in this program is having information that is accessible, digestible, and usable. We need to be able to find this information quickly, and it shouldn't be dependent on our networks telling us what we should be reading. And that information needs to be digestible. So it should be a good read as opposed to needing a dictionary or a maths degree to decipher the graphs. I've been there, and we really want to be having these attractive and usable. So they're very pertinent to the problems that the sectors are facing. So we're really thinking about who is going to be using the evidence or the products tomorrow to inform their planning. And that requires contextualized applied research. Now, those of us who have been teachers, we know that you can have exactly the same classroom. On Monday morning, they behave very differently to how they are on Friday afternoon. So clearly, when we're synthesizing the evidence of effective teaching, and much of that is coming from high-income countries, although it's good to see more of that also coming from low and middle income countries now, we need to contextualize. So there's a synthesis of evidence about what works, then there's an application or the testing out of it and a generation of that evidence within programs that are live in, particularly in Sub-Saharan Africa and Southern Asia, so that that information or that evidence is then made pertinent to the context and to the realities of the teachers are facing in different contexts. And then my final point to make here, that this is very much a collaborative, shared endeavor. It is not going back to the drawing board. Much of the evidence that has been produced, this work is building on that evidence, and to think of this as a broad tent that different organizations have different focus on pedagogy, that's coming together, and the Science of Teaching and Learning program is helping to amplify it, and really keen on having your feedback on how these products are being used, but also on how they can be better and what other areas to focus on. So just stopping and then reflecting back on this wonderful picture of this young girl, there is an art and a craft of teaching that makes this smile come on a student's face, but there is a science to it, and we need to be more confident in articulating it, and more of the, that's also my timer going off saying stop talking, and I'll give 10 seconds more on this aspect of teachers, policy makers, implementers, and funders being familiar with this evidence. And my final point is, thank you to all the teachers. We are all here because of what our teachers done for us. And in the current time with COVID pandemic, they're doing an incredibly challenging role. So I've got to say thank you to them.
Thanks, Asia. We appreciate the guidance and leadership of the Gates Foundation on this work, and for you in particular. And I think that your takeaway around the focus on pedagogy has really informed these guides and this discussion. So thanks for that. We'll turn next to Michael Crawford, who's a lead education specialist for the World Bank. Michael.
Thank you, Ben. Good morning, everyone. I also want to thank Asia and the Gates Foundation for the leadership and for making things happen on the foundational learning agenda. There's a sense we're feeling revitalized with a lot of partners, and Gates' work is really responsible for that in a lot of ways. So very appreciative. The World Bank, we have a learning target now for foundational learning in reading, where we're hoping to have by 2030, help our clients have by 2030, the number of children who don't learn to read by age 10. And there are about 100 million children born in the world, a little bit more than 100 million children born in the world. Right now, only about 55 million are learning to read adequately by age 10. So we need this massive effort. We need it to be an understandable effort for the millions and tens of millions of teachers who are involved. So what happens? So part of what we're doing in this accelerator program, which is a a World Bank and Gates Foundation partnership for foundational learning, which I'll give you some more details on in a moment. What we're doing is taking a new look at foundational learning and reading from the classroom to the systems that are supporting classrooms, using a concept that the colleagues at RTI, Luis Crouches, has called instructional coherence. How does it all come together? And the first question you ask is, what happens when kids learn to read? What has to happen? So a lot of people in the technical literature are familiar with what's called the simple view of reading, where you have language comprehension and decoding that come together for reading comprehension. But I think we're adding into this something that might be called the simple view of reading instruction, which is that you have time on task and you have the format. And this is where the structured pedagogy comes in. You have the format of how you present material, you have content, and then you have lots and lots of practice, lots and lots of supplementary reading for young kids. And a lot of evidence supporting if you get these things right, you're going to have your kids be like those 9 out of 10 rather than those 1 out of 10. So the structured pedagogy guides that we're talking about this morning, they're a wonderful resource for changing what happens in the classroom where change is needed, which is not every classroom, it's not every teacher, but in many cases, you partially removing a lesson planning burden from teachers, which they may not be able to do optimally. And I think we're going to hear a lot about the experience of them, some appreciating, others not, having a chance to have progression of learning topics set out for them, which hopefully they present. The kids learn to read, but it's an iterative process. And one of the things that I think is important in this is, how do we have everybody learn? Not just the kids learning to read, the teachers learning, the policymakers learning, the development partners learning. Well, one thing I hope we're going to be doing more and more is, and this is something that Asia mentioned, using plain language or non-expert explanations, right? We just really have to know what are we doing, what is happening. So at the bank, we're working on something we call the early grade reading rainbow, which we hope will be a kind of explanation of that process or an investigation of the process in a very short time to start conversations. Then hopefully you understand, why is this content or this format in the structured pedagogy? So a lot of this is revitalizing the idea that learning to read is a progression of language-based tasks. And if you have a certain amount of time, if you have a good structure, good content, good implementation fidelity, and you can control some of the systemic problems that are preventing that, you can really make progress. We are going to be making intense efforts, again, with the Gates Foundation and other partners, with clients leading the way in 5 countries, Niger, Mozambique, Kenya, 4 countries and a state, the Edo state in Nigeria. And these have some real similarities in the challenges and some real differences. And we're very enthusiastic about the ability to put extra effort to help our partners. And I want to just wind up by saying that I think the partners and clients have come together around this initiative in a way I haven't seen. This is my 3rd decade now. I'm in the middle of my 3rd decade doing development, and I'm really seeing and appreciating a willingness to work together that I think is a harbinger, I hope will be a harbinger of success. So thanks very much for inviting me to be part of this, and looking forward to our discussion this morning.
Thanks, Michael. So thanks so much for describing the work of World Bank and the accelerated countries. We've heard from the Gates Foundation and the World Bank about their partnership and about the broader efforts to focus on improving literacy and numeracy, and particularly in the structured pedagogy area. So the Science of Teaching work is led by an advisory committee, all of which have endorsed the work here, particularly on structured pedagogy. So I want to just call out the importance of that and the unique partnership that's come in this particular effort. So this idea of having a heavier focus on pedagogy and plain language, instructions, and ideas on how to implement has been kind of underpinning our work. And it's been endorsed by organizations like FHI, 360, and Room to Read, or implementers, by researchers like APHRC here in Nairobi, as well as San Francisco State University, and the donor group, FCDO, Gates themselves, GPE, USAID, World Bank, and UNICEF. So it's really exciting to see organizations coming together to kind of say that this is an important issue for us. So Patrick, we actually want to go and include you now in some data collection and have you think. There's a poll here with 3 questions, and we'd love for you to answer them. So they should be coming up on your screen now. So you can just answer them as you go down, scroll down to get to the number 2 and number 3. The first one is a question about how you define structured pedagogy. The second one is a question around how effective you think structured pedagogy programs are in improving foundational literacy and numeracy. And the third question is about how prepared you actually feel to lead or be part of leadership on implementing and supporting a structured pedagogy program. I'm laughing because I know how hard that is. So please fill out the responses in your polls, and we'll give you a minute to do that. Welcome for those of you who've come after the meeting started. This is the Structured Pedagogy launch, and we're walking through the background of the guides before we get to the real meat of the panel today, which is to discuss what these actual guides look like and how they can be used. But for now, if you could fill out these 3 items. Okay, Patrick, this might be a little fast, but can we see if we have the results from enough people to show the results?
Sure. We have about 60% of the attendees chiming in here. So I'll go ahead and close the poll and share the results. Bear with me one moment.
Thanks, Patrick. So here are the results. So for the first question, how would you define it? I think, the vast majority of people have it correct. It's the combination of efforts that I think is really important to structured pedagogy. Unlike previous interventions to improve the quality of instruction, it's around combining things together so they're integrated and coordinated. So there's lesson plans for teachers on the one hand, there's student materials for children on the other, there's training that's really focused on supporting teachers on using those individual materials and teachers as well, and then supporting teachers. So the difference between the first option and the fourth one was about including that teacher support. And I think that's an important part, and the evidence would suggest from particularly some studies in South Africa, that having coaching is an important investment in having impact on structured pedagogy in general. So number 2, how effective are structured pedagogy programs? I think if you read the literature review that's part of these how-to guides, you'll have a deeper dive into this. But I think I would agree with the predominant majority of the participants that it's somewhere in the very effective to effective range. I think we're seeing large-scale impacts in complex environments using structured pedagogy programs. But I do want to say here that we are not under any circumstances saying that doing a structured pedagogy program will definitely improve outcomes. In fact, the reason why we've set out to do this work on the how-to guides is because it's the implementation quality, it's the design issues, it's how the program works inside a government. Those characteristics are the ones that determine effectiveness. So the real answer to number 2 is, how effective are these programs? It fundamentally depends on how you implement. So maybe there'll be something in this discussion today that would help you implement or design a program a bit more effectively. And lastly, if you were asked to lead a program today or tomorrow, how prepared are you today? About half of you are feeling, 57% are feeling prepared or well prepared. That's good. 35%, 41% are various levels of unprepared, and only 2% of you would quit if your boss told you it was time to lead a structured pedagogy program. Having been part of leadership on 1 or 2, I might quit if I was asked to do it again. Just kidding. It's just a lot of work, and I think we've learned a lot and are quite humble about how hard this work is. Next slide, please. So as we think about this structured pedagogy how-to guides, we want to say from the outset that we know there are many other documents and activities and papers that have described structured pedagogy. Those are technical. What's different about this is it's focused on the practical implementation. The emphasis for this day and for this work is how to do it. How? We're actually at the stage now in January 2021 where there is evidence to build, not just on whether they work, but on how they work. If you see this map, these are just a handful, a sampling of programs that are large scale, structured pedagogy programs that also have evidence of rigorous impact. So it's kind of a unique period we're in where there's a growing amount of evidence about not only do these things work, I think the answer is yes, but different characteristics of these programs have had different levels of impact. So we can learn from you, and if you're an organization or an individual or a policymaker leading one of the programs that are highlighted here, thanks so much. There are many others that will be included in the how-to guides that aren't included, that aren't on this map, that have informed us. But we came to this effort with some real humility and drawing from a lot of examples that are included here and elsewhere across organizations, across donors, and particularly across different countries and policymakers. It's worth noting that the contexts are different. We have, low and middle income countries and even middle income countries on this map. We also have different subjects. There's some kind of maybe misnomer that this is really about literacy. I think there are evidence of effective structured pedagogy programs also in numeracy. And if you look at DRC, there's also social-emotional learning. I know there's actually other programs on social-emotional learning that are having promising impacts on outcomes. So the evidence we pulled together for these guides are drawn from those various programs and across areas, across subjects, and across government implementation styles. So the guides try and address that diversity. Next slide. I just want to, before we get to the main part of our panel today, which is the actual guides themselves, we want to just give you the bigger picture of how we organize the guides and why. So this layout gives you some of the topics that we considered. So each of these little circles represents a guide that has a 5 to 6 page document. So if you're an implementer or if you're a policymaker, there might be a portion of the structured pedagogy process that you feel quite comfortable in, and another one where you might need some additional support. So you could use this guide to focus on particular aspects of improving structured pedagogy programs and maybe not the whole package. So as we're going through this, think about where your programs are stronger or weaker, or where your design is stronger and weaker. So let's look at some of them. Number one, government leadership. These programs, I think, consistently work if they're working through government. So you'll hear about that in the government leadership one. Design. I think what we found is that there are programs that have really done a great job of structuring themselves to maximize design. Curriculum, scope and sequence. Governments already have curriculum. So thinking about how your structured pedagogy program fits into that curriculum and taking that, making it paced at an achievable level in ways that would actually work, connecting teachers' guides and books. That's that guide. Taking the spreadsheet of the scope and sequence and turning into beautiful textbooks with teachers' guides. That's the materials development guide. Teacher training, so many people are doing training, so many donors, so many countries are doing training, but how do you do training that actually works, that actually helps an individual teacher to teach? Teacher support, I think a key bit of evidence suggests that how teachers are supported, the frequency, the style makes a big difference. The evidence from that is compiled in the support guide. Data systems, how do you take not only the classroom level, but connect the classroom level and up in a data management system and accountability structure. And finally, systems management, really focused on the policymaker and the government leader. How do you manage this overall system for improvement, and how do you connect it all together? So that was the very small task that we had in front of us, and I'm really quite proud of the outcomes, but we really do present these with a lot of humility in both how hard the work is and the task of developing these together. So next slide. Today's presenters are the stars we talked about before. Joe DeStefano, who's a senior director at RTI, Dr. Peggy Duback, who's a literacy expert, Dr. Wendy Rylangita, who's a senior education advisor. So they'll be the ones presenting, but if you look at the next slide, there are several other authors that really worked hard on these. Jessica, Jonathan, Rachel, Yasmin, and some guy at the top. Reach out to them if you have any issues, or through the Science of Teaching website for questions, comments, or even complaints about them. So let's hear from Julianne about the Padlet tool that we'll be using to kind of guide our discussion. Julianne?
Thank you, Ben. All right, everyone, and greetings. I'm Jillian Norman, and I'm the project manager of the grant from the RTI side. And this next portion, I just wanted to give you a quick rundown of how it's going to work. We're going to be using a tool called Padlet to facilitate interaction between you and the presenters. So I'll be sharing my screen as the presenters walk through select pieces of their Padlet. But you should have all received an email yesterday with a link to the Padlet. If you registered a bit late, not to worry, Patrick is pasting the link to the Padlet in the chat and you can access it now. The Padlet is free to use. If you comment, it will be anonymous, but we would love it if you would put your name next to it if you feel comfortable. You can also create an account, which is free, so that your name does appear with your comment. We will go through the Padlet. We'll have a 5-minute pause for you to add comments to it, and you'll see that the presenters have left a few questions for you. And the Padlet will be open to use throughout the duration of the presentation and afterwards, so we strongly encourage you to please make use of this Padlet. And I will pass it over to Joe now, who will kick us off with the first guide.
Thanks, and hi everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to wherever you are in the world. It's a real pleasure to be able to provide a brief overview of some of the work we've been doing. I'm going to start off with Guide 1, which provides advice on building up demand and listing support and engaging leadership as precursors to designing and implementing a successful structured pedagogy program. This guide highlights the importance of first listening. To engage government leadership, you must know who the key decision makers are and understand their priorities and motivations. You do that by listening to what people say, what they focus on, what their preoccupations are. I can still hear Louise Crouch's voice in my head from back in the 90s, emphasizing that you need to scratch their itch, not yours. In the early stages, it's probably useful to make a map of these key players and what their priorities are, what their motivations are, and what their potential interest or objection to a structured pedagogy program may be. And linked to that is the important tactic of developing demand. Use the map you made to understand how to respond to key stakeholders' priorities and speak to their objectives and to the strategies that they see as important in the current education sector plan. Use evidence that is meaningful to those different stakeholders you are trying to convince. And that may require presenting information in a variety of different ways. And a variety of actors within the system need to become supporters of the program. Having leadership invested in and demanding the program means that they can then enlist the support of key actors at all levels. And for those actors, their concern is going to be how the program will impact their jobs, their day-to-day tasks, and their lives. Will the program be adding one more competing priority to already overtaxed positions? Will people be confused about which of their many tasks are most important, like depicted here? Reviewing and focusing job descriptions, therefore, is critical. And most importantly, figuring out how to focus those jobs on improving teaching and learning. And school support staff at the district or sub-district levels, for positions that each country has under different names, curriculum support officers, primary education advisors, circuit supervisors, cluster supervisors, these are critical players. So surfacing what may need to change in those job descriptions in order for the program to succeed is an important initial step that can then inform program design. And these kinds of staff are vitally important because they play a big role in determining how teachers will perceive the program and in communicating to teachers what they are expected to do. We know that not all teachers will get on board. Some will resist, some can learn to adopt to the new structured pedagogy approach with the right kind of support. Recognizing this can guide programs and ministries in terms of the strategies that you need to deploy to increase the number of teachers adopting and successfully implementing the program. This last point is critical about how to maximize program fidelity of implementation, if you will, and it's an important aspect of designing a structured pedagogy approach. And I'll talk now briefly about guide number 2, which addresses program design. So you've got government leadership on board, you've helped generate demand for a structured pedagogy approach. What are the important things to keep in mind when actually designing the program? Among the aspects of program design discussed in Guide 2, an important message is really to do more by doing less. Reducing the amount of complexity in a program increases the likelihood that it can be successfully implemented. This does not mean oversimplifying what teachers are asked to do, but rather making it easier for teachers to get on board, to try out structured pedagogy, experience success with their students using it, and then build that out on that success to make steady progress. In addition to what we were just saying for Guide 1, targeting the teachers who will support and adopt a new pedagogical approach, we can borrow the concept of the zone of proximal development and apply it to how we design a structured pedagogy program to maximize teacher uptake. This is a concept applied by teachers to students, but one we can really apply to teachers as well. And it highlights the importance of understanding at first where teachers are, what is their existing practice, and how far is that practice from where the program intends them to be, where we want them to be more successful. And recognizing the supports that need to be built into the program so that teachers can be helped to make steady progress. And Wendy will say more about that a bit later in the presentations. The idea is don't expect it all to happen in 1 week. Think about instructional change in a phased approach and design your program and expectations accordingly. Another important lesson we think programs need to account for in their design is to fully expect to get some of the design wrong. What this means is we have to build into programs the means to innovate, iterate, and improve. Only by smart piloting and good feedback can we learn how teachers will actually use the program's materials and can understand the constraints district support staff will face in visiting schools, or can see what happens with what it really takes to have productive teacher communities of practice, or the operational hurdles that need to be overcome in materials distribution. These important operational lessons are things we need to be paying attention to and applying as we go. And so this argues for an adaptive management approach, designing in degrees of flexibility that allow a program to iterate and adjust as needed, allow time in allocating effort to revising materials, tweaking training content and delivery, and rethinking teacher support structures and approaches. And my colleague Peggy will now give an overview of the guides that deal with some of those details of the related to curriculum and materials. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. My name is Peggy Duback, and I'm a collaborating author on some of these guides, and I'm really glad to engage with you all today. Thanks for being here. Guide 3 addresses understanding the existing curriculum and developing a scope and sequence for both literacy and for numeracy. I want to direct your attention to one of the visuals from Guide 3 that shows a 3-step process of learn, decide, and develop. At step 1, learning the context. Learn from people that develop the existing curriculum. Learn from documents and learn from teachers. The intention is to learn what's being done well, to learn priorities, and to identify what might be missing for children to show literacy or numeracy growth. At step 2, a small team uses the information learned in step 1 to make decisions about skills and pacing. This includes establishing guiding principles. Step 3 takes the decisions from step 2 to develop a scope and sequence. We call it living because it'll be continuously updated when developing the teaching and learning materials, which are addressed in Guide 4. We can shift to Guide 4 now. Guide 4 is also very practical. It addresses teaching and learning materials development. These materials are not ephemeral. They'll last and they're high profile. So they need to be professional and user-friendly to the teachers and to the children. Developing them takes both a lot of time and a specific team. To see the recommended personnel and their roles, let's examine one of the visuals from Guide 4. The subject matter expert knows literacy or numeracy and was very likely involved in the creation of the scope and sequence. At this phase, they continue to identify appropriate content for instruction and collaborate with the team on the level of support to provide the teachers in the materials. The timeline's going to be tight with a lot of moving parts. So having a dedicated production manager will help to meet those deadlines. The reviewers, those should be a mix of people. They'll review the draft materials at designated time points, referencing the scope and sequence, their knowledge of the context, and the overall goals. Writers will be also a variety of people, including from the ministry and teachers. Among other expertise they bring, they'll help to ensure that the language is developmentally appropriate for everyone. A graphic designer will create a layout that earns both a wow factor and is helpful, such as including thumbnails or formatting that guides a teacher's eye to just the right spot in the lesson. All of these 5 roles are really critical and busy. So therefore, having distinct administrative support will make the development run smooth. The collection of these guides that we're presenting today also includes a separate literature review. So let's go there now. The literature review is organized to be friendly. I hope you'll use it. There's a section of 11 things we know about structured pedagogy, and there's an opposing section of describing 7 things we don't know. So I encourage you to add these to your research agenda. In the history section, we share examples of a variety of education models, a few going back centuries that used a structured approach. Perhaps you're surprised by this. So this is one reason the Lit Review also defines key terms. You heard a version earlier and you voted on it. We define structured pedagogy as a coordinated, combined approach that includes teacher materials, student materials, training, and ongoing support. So we define the term even further with a visual that's included in the Lit Review. Let's go there now. Specifically, we present this continuum of teacher autonomy. With anything inside that little white box, we consider structured pedagogy. It ranges from offering the most direction to teachers by scripting every word they say, to the highest level of autonomy when they select from a menu of suggested activities. Again, all 5 models in the white box, we consider structured pedagogy. The level of support and autonomy that you give to teachers will depend on many factors, including the familiarity they have with the instructional methods that you want them to use. So now we want to hear from you. This is a global meeting. There's 372 people on this call. So let's learn from each other. Each guide has a column here in Padlet. Go to any of the first 5 columns, look for the word question, and respond to it. Go in an order that makes sense to you, but just stick to the first 5 columns for now. We'll reconvene in 5 minutes.
Everyone, as you're looking at the Padlet, just note that the Padlet includes links to the website, the Science of Teaching website with the structured pedagogy guides that has PDFs. So you can be commenting, you can be looking at those as we have this last minute or so for you to comment. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, I'm going to ask everyone to bring attention back to this sort of the panel now. I hope that after this session, you'll continue looking at the Padlet and adding comments, and we can continue having a discussion that way. But for now, we're going to continue looking at the guides. I'm Wendy Relangitza with RTI, along with all of the other panelists. I've been supporting structured pedagogy programs in a number of different places, and excited to be here today and to carry on where Peggy left off. As you'll recall, she talked about developing the scope and sequence, developing materials that incorporate instructional strategies for teaching early grade reading and mathematics. And the next step, of course, is to get those materials in the hands of teachers and students and get teachers using those materials, using those strategies in their classroom. In order to do that, we need to provide support for teachers, make sure they're prepared to do that. So Guide 5 focuses on the first step in that, which is the in-service teacher training. And the in-service training is really the opportunity to familiarize teachers with these new materials, with these new strategies, have them feeling comfortable and ready to start trying to use them in their classroom. In the guide, there is, it talks about the content of these trainings, it talks about delivery of these trainings, it talks about logistics, and I've just pulled out some key points from the guide, which of course goes in much more detail. The first being less is more. Rather than trying to sort of cover all the topics we want the teachers possibly to know, we want to focus on a few key ones that you can really dig into well, remembering that relevance is key. We often talk about wanting the teacher to be able to, whatever they learned in training, to go and apply it the next day in their classroom. So making sure that it's relevant to what they're going to be needing to do in their classroom. And I wanted to call out a good comment I just saw on Padlet. Someone added the idea to be focusing not so much on, for example, memorizing what the components are reading of, but how do you do those things in your classroom? And that's the relevance that teachers need. Using the materials in training, getting the student books as well as the teacher's guides into the trainees' hands, having them practice in the training. I'm sure many of us have seen more traditional trainings that might have a lot of lecture, a lot of presentation, maybe some discussion, but we want to see the needle move more to spend more time in practice so that teachers, when they reach the end of the training, they feel ready. Okay, what I just did, what I just practiced in this training, I can now go and try with my students in my classroom. Linked to this is the idea that it makes sense to have shorter but more frequent trainings rather than longer trainings once a year. If you have 10 days of training at the beginning of the year and are trying to cover what the teacher may need to be doing the entire year, by the time they get 3 or 6 months down the road, it's no longer immediate and relevant for them. In the training, they might not be able to think about what they're going to need to do in the second term. At the beginning of the year, maybe in grade 1, they're focusing on learning letters. And so getting into sentence reading is not relevant at that time. You want to be able to bring them back later on when it is more immediate and more relevant. One of the logistic aspects I did want to bring up, there's a number in the guide itself. One I wanted to highlight is the importance of trying to get to all of the teachers in a particular school. A lot of times for budget reasons, we might say, we can't afford to train all the teachers right now. So let's just bring in one from each school. We can get to the others later. You need to consider the trade-offs in a situation like that. If you just train one teacher from the school, then she's going back to an environment where she's the only one trying out these new things. She doesn't have colleagues who are also trying to do the same thing. Maybe she's going to try to teach the other teachers how to do it, but then, you know, that gets it watered down and it's more difficult for everybody. So those are the kinds of trade-offs we discuss in the guide and that need to be thought about when planning for the trainings. Again, the main message for the in-service training is this is where we want to get teachers ready to try using the new materials, but we can't expect they're not going to go in the classroom and suddenly be experts at doing all of these strategies. That is a process that takes time. And that's where Guide 6 comes in, where we look at providing ongoing support for teachers. Maybe they need to start with just trying one strategy and getting better and better at that, and you know, then picking up another strategy. And so in order to determine what kind of support structures, how are we going to support teachers along that path, we need to start with looking at the teacher learning cycle. How do teachers change their practice? And how this happens is by the teacher trying out a new technique, trying out the new material and seeing how it works with their children. Maybe they need to tweak something to fit their classroom and then trying it again. And as they see that technique, that material working for them and for their students, that's when they're going to continue using it. And again, we're asking them to do a lot of new things. They're not going to necessarily be able to do everything all at once. They can try one of the new strategies first. As they become more adept at that, then they can try another strategy. So that kind of cycle is what we need to be helping teachers move through. How that support that will get them there may not look the same everywhere. It may depend on what's already in the system, what teachers are used to and makes them feel comfortable. Even geographical factors can play in. So there are a number of different modalities for providing support that have been used and have research evidence. I'm sure many of us are aware that coaching, there's a lot of research that has looked at coaching and found it to be an evidence-based effective modality. Other modalities haven't been researched as much yet. But what is clear from the research evidence is that actually multiple modalities, a combination of modalities, and having multiple touch points for teachers is what is going to provide the kind of support in a feasible and effective way that they need. So looking at the context, the needs of the teachers, and then looking what combination of modalities is going to fit in that context. And with that, I'm going to turn it on to Joe, who I think will take us a little bit back out of the classroom and link back to systems.
Thanks, Wendy. So Peggy and Wendy just gave us some of the flavor of what are in guides 3 through 6, and which cover kind of the technical guts of structured pedagogy approach. Guides 7 and 8 and an additional one for education leaders, which I'll summarize now, are designed to help us and help our ministry colleagues think about what's needed for the education system to support implementation of structured pedagogy. I want to quickly call out, I saw a comment from Charlie Gordon on the Padlet that about whether the order of these implies some order of importance, and it's I want to call it out because we wrestled with this exact question, Charlie, when we were trying to think of like how to arrange the presentation today. So one answer to the question is the numbering does not imply the order of importance, and I think Ben tried to highlight that initially, but that's something we can speak to further. And that the systems aspects of this are critically important. And as somebody who spent 30 years of my life working on systems issues, I would gladly emphasize that and agree with you on that point, Charlie. But let's start with Guide 7, which deals with data systems and accountability. When it comes to data, of course, we are interested in learning outcomes as a true measure of whether a program has achieved its ultimate objectives. However, unless we also track program implementation, we won't truly be able to understand and evaluate program effectiveness. We therefore advocate using a theory of change-based approach for monitoring and evaluation and for defining data requirements. Here you see a very simplified theory of change for a structured pedagogy program, but it does try to show the key elements: training materials to teachers, coaching or ongoing support, the kinds of things Wendy has just been talking about. Data will need to be collected to show the extent to which each of these key elements are being successfully implemented. Are books delivered to schools? More importantly, are they in the hands of teachers and students and being used on a day-to-day basis during lessons? Are teachers attending all of the training workshops? And how frequently are coaches, if that's part of the model, be able to visit, observe, and provide constructive input to teachers? So a structured approach depicted here in a minute in simplified form to collecting data that answers these kinds of questions will allow us to assess the quality of program implementation. As Ben said, the effectiveness is not so much in the concept of structured pedagogy, but in the quality of the implementation. And variations in that quality, which will very likely occur, can give us insight into what determines program success. So building in the means to monitor and learn from implementation is also critical. So collecting data in each of the kinds of categories you see depicted here. And I'll reiterate the importance of getting rapid feedback regarding the elements of the program theory of change so that course corrections can be made in time. Waiting to the end of the year of implementation to measure whether reading proficiency or math proficiency improved or not misses a real opportunity to monitor and improve implementation prior to reaching that point. So early feedback and data showing how implementation is progressing are essential to having the adaptive management approach that I talked about earlier. Moving on to the last two guides, I will talk about take a broader look at what factors of the system at the system level contribute to the success of structured pedagogy. Guide 8 is intended to help program designers and managers think about the aspects of the education system they and their ministry counterparts can focus on as drivers of program success. First is working with national leaders to make improved foundational learning a priority and communicating that priority over and over and over again. Here's a great example of a quote from Prime Minister Modi of India when he made this public announcement last September. This is striking for several reasons. One, he mentions learning to read in order to read to learn, and I just absolutely love that. And then he sets out a very specific, measurable objective that all children should meet. Getting that kind of commitment and communication is a key part of program success. Setting expectations for improved learning, but beyond that, then also setting expectations for actors throughout the system. If children are to achieve what Prime Minister Modi set out as a benchmark for early reading, then what do teachers need to do? What do head teachers need to do? What do district and sub-district staff all need to do in order to achieve that outcome? Setting, communicating, and reinforcing expectations down the system is a key thing education leaders need to do. And using a variety of means and media to convey and reinforce those expectations is something programs can help ministries learn to do, especially since communications is something bureaucracies are typically not very good at. Part of what needs to be communicated is who will be accountable to whom and for what. We all know the importance of having accountability within the education system. What we want to stress here is that if schools and teachers are to be more accountable for improving student outcomes, then the system also has to be accountable to them for providing the inputs and supports they need to be successful. This is connected to what Guide 7 was saying about tracking all aspects of program implementation. Schools can be expected to improve only when they've received the necessary inputs and support. How can we make the system accountable for that? And what data will animate that accountability are important issues. So trying out different approaches to social accountability at the school and community level may also be a way to help education systems be more accountable to the communities they are meant to serve, creating a pull on the system to deliver a quality program implementation. So moving on to the final guide, this is intended to help education leaders think about what it takes for structured pedagogy programs to work. So it kind of, it takes a lot of what's in the other guides and tries to put it into a format that speaks directly to education leaders. So 6 factors are identified and summarized, and those are shown on the Padlet. And many of them have been raised this morning and are covered in one or another of the guides we've been talking about. This is the diagram that Ben showed early on, and that a lot of these points are touched on in this last guide. In addition to summarizing what it takes to successfully implement structured pedagogy, the guides for educational leaders links success in early grades to broader education system success, and emphasizes the need to bring up the bottom, the low-performing students in schools, as a way to make an education system more equitable. As a bonus, this final guide also provides, next to the image, this final guide also provides education leaders with a set of questions that they can ask people like us, who will be working with them to introduce and help design a structured pedagogy program. You may all want to take a minute to look at these questions and practice having good answers to them in the future. Thank you all, and with that, I'll turn it back over to Ben.
Thanks so much, Joe. Really exciting work, even though I was involved in it. It's exciting to see how you all presented this and kind of the meat that's underneath it. So if you haven't had a chance to look at the Padlet, if you hadn't had a chance to look at the guides themselves, we really want to encourage you. And as we move forward, please be making your comments on the Padlet. It will still be active. And then on the Q&A function, as we'll get ready to do some questions and answers. But before we do that, we're going to hear from Stephen Taylor, who is the Director of Research, Monitoring, and Evaluation at the South African Department of Education. In this role, Stephen has kind of the unique perspective of having led as well as studied several interventions that have used structured pedagogy methods. So he has experience on both sides of things. So Stephen, over to you.
Yes, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. And thank you so much for including me. It's a privilege to comment on these guides that have been developed. They're really a fantastic resource. I think looking at it from a government or policymaker perspective, these guides provide solutions or address at least two key problems that one faces at a systemic level around implementing curriculum on a large scale. Firstly, I think it addresses the issue of how to translate the official curriculum into daily and weekly routines. And then secondly, how to improve coherence between what the curriculum says, what teacher development programs are doing, what learning materials are being developed and distributed. Often those things are a little bit disjointed. And I think a learning program or a structured learning program does is it brings all those things together, it anchors it around a set of lesson plans, it anchors all those different support structures around a coherent program. So it's a very practical way to address coherence in implementing curriculum at scale, which is a key problem that education departments and ministries face. Then what I'd like to say, just as I look at these guides, is I really think they've done well at providing extremely practical and comprehensive help for different kinds of people in the system as they navigate different points in the process of designing and implementing structured pedagogy programs. At times, it can operate really as a checklist for people as you move through the different designs to just check, is there something you maybe haven't focused on enough, something you haven't thought through carefully enough, something where you could add an element to improve the way you're going about designing or implementing a component of a program. Secondly, I think the guides are a real resource in terms of communication, communicating what is a structured pedagogy program. This helps advocate for its use and its effectiveness. It provides detailed guidance. Linking to the communication idea, I think that what these guides do, as I've read over them, I feel like they give policymakers, they give many of us vocabulary and ideas which can help us explain and advocate for for structured pedagogy programs and for garnering support for such programs. For example, I found the continuum of teacher autonomy that was presented earlier today very useful, because that's a point of critique often that I feel like lesson plans often get. The point is often made that this is de-skilling teachers or deprofessionalizing teachers as one takes away their autonomy. But I think the guide then, through that example of a continuum of teacher autonomy, just explains how that is not necessarily the case, and one can be quite flexible around where teachers are, how mature the program is in its implementation, and one can really allow a lot of flexibility around teacher autonomy as appropriate. So it gives one ideas, it gives one vocabulary to help for proponents of structured pedagogy to help explain and defend what has been done. I think even very practically, the guides provide a resource for service providers, and at least in our experience in South Africa, often it is service providers such as literacy NGOs who end up doing a lot of work around materials development. They're often the ones contracted to develop the lesson plans and materials, as well as implement and project manage the program. And so I envisage that they would often end up using these guides as they improve on what they're doing. And then as I close, I think what is perhaps most impressive about structured pedagogy programs in general and these guides is that I think it's important for policymakers and for everyone not to miss the rigor and the relevance of the evidence upon which such programs are based. So the rigor and the relevance. So I think Ben showed a map earlier showing the world and showing all the various places where programs have been implemented and studies have been done. These are programs that have been implemented at a large scale across the world using very rigorous experimental research methods, but also complementing that with classroom observations and all sorts of detailed qualitative research methods as well. They've been implemented over a period of time now, so they've been implemented and improved upon, tested rigorously, and then re-implemented. And if you look at just where these studies are being done and where the programs have been implemented, it is not as if it's coming from a narrow base of evidence. Certain countries that are now being pushed upon countries in low and middle income situations. These programs have been tested in extremely relevant settings, and I think therefore the evidence should be taken seriously, and these guides really are based upon a wealth of work that has been done. So well done to everyone involved. I hope these guides really do bear a lot of fruit for everyone who will be using them. Thanks very much. Back to you, Ben.
Thanks, Stephen, and thanks for the rigorous evidence that your department has contributed to the sector knowing how these programs will work, and for your comments today. We'll now turn to Rebecca Rhodes, who's a Senior Education Advisor on Literacy and Distance Education for the Center of Education at USAID. Welcome, Rebecca.
Thanks, Ben, and thanks to everyone for putting this work together, for attending this morning. We at USAID are really excited and privileged to have been a part of this work in the recent months. So I was asked to talk a little bit about how these guides can be practical and helpful, particularly actually from the donor perspective for education officers at USAID, for example, but also for partners in the field. So I'll try to offer a little bit on that, and I'm sure the people in attendance have thoughts on it as well. I would start though by emphasizing that these guides, as Stephen has just said, they really are evidence-based. When we look at the elements that you presented, Ben, we come back to elements that are very similar, for example, to the ones that USAID presents in its Reading Matters framework, or that the World Bank has incorporated into its work on the literacy policy package that will be hopefully rolled out in the accelerator countries that Michael was mentioning. So we really do need to accept that what is here is based on the best science available. I think the other real strength here, or another real strength, is how comprehensive these are, and that they do try to look across that universe of elements and at the interstices between them, trying to connect systems level and classroom level work, and then trying to provide really practical elements in each guide, like the list of additional resources, the identification of areas where technical expertise is needed, the red alerts, the non-negotiables. These are really written in a form to be able to be applied. I would also encourage everyone to read the extensive literature review, because I think it really does successfully demonstrate the scientific case for this and helps us move away from where we were stuck for a long time And I was stuck for a long time in the to script or not to script debate, which is a fairly shallow push-pull tug of war that doesn't really help the children. So I think if you need to work in the field to help people understand why we have this structured pedagogy idea and concept and scientific basis, that literature review will help you very much. The guides have an incredible number of uses, obviously. For someone not terribly familiar with structured pedagogy, just the depth of understanding they can convey. I would say for educational authorities in the countries where we are all trying to help the children read better or learn their numeracy better, the guides offer a point of departure for considering how the systems function as compared to the content of the guide. So if you just can do a simple comparison between what you're reading in the science and in the evidence and what you're experiencing in the context, that can open an opportunity to discuss future education reforms. For a funder or a donor, these guides practically are a rough draft of a solicitation for proposals. A lot of us spend a lot of our time trying to write solicitations to ask organizations to bid on money to work. And the guidelines in these guides could be easily incorporated into a solicitation asking for this type of work in a particular context. And then obviously for implementing partners, they really do provide a way to build in quality control from the very beginning of design or of an implementation. I would point to the example of the teacher professional development teacher training handout, where the point is made that shorter trainings of 3 to 5 days spread across the school year are preferable and have been shown to lead to better results than 7 to 10 day trainings. And this is something that frankly not everybody knows. Not every person working with the best of intention in the field may know that. So having this guidance at the start can help you think of your training in a different way than perhaps you had considered doing it when you began. Another good example of this is the table on data accountability and systems in that handout that suggest indicators by program component. So you can find in these guides really relevant and useful indicators to monitor and evaluate your work. You don't have to sit there on your own and make them up just from the top of your head. Implementing partners can also use the information for quality control in their own programs. So if you have a program that's underway and you're trying to implement it and you want to know, am I really following the best evidence or science? You could refer back to these guides, learn from them, and then look at what you're doing on the ground and then make adjustments. So for example, the materials guide that we talked about, a lot of programs have to develop materials, almost all of them, in fact. And you may already be deep in the weeds of developing materials, but you may want to take a step back, read that materials guide, and then think about, is there something to my process here that I could adjust to improve? And then I think the last thing I would want to mention, Ben, is these guides can be used across contexts, right? This is not specific to a particular country or a particular language. This is specific to the way children learn and to a lot of neuroscience that we know about learning. So even in a crisis-affected context, and I know this is a challenging statement, but I think it's worthwhile reading these and reflecting, what can I take from this so that some variation of this can be applied in the work that I'm doing, so that we don't continue to see a sort of disconnect between the reading and numeracy instruction that we provide in crisis-affected contexts and the reading and numeracy instruction that we provide in other contexts. We can't do everything in a crisis-affected context, but that doesn't mean that the content of these guides is not at least useful for reflection even in those areas. So that's what I would offer to the donor community and the implementing partner community. And with that, Ben, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thanks so much, Rebecca. I think so many of us have the COVID-19 situation at the top of mind, and thinking about how to apply the learning we have about structured pedagogy to this time period is really essential. So we have lots of questions, and I think in a moment, my colleague Julian can show the website. As we just spend 1 minute about the website, I want you all to share your questions on the Q&A function. We're going to try and go rapid fire through a bunch of them. Thanks to everybody for going fast so that we could actually spend time answering questions. We'll be doing that for the rest of the time. I just want to draw your attention to the website itself. So this website includes all the materials we've talked about, all the guides, the literature review, everything is there. It's also in this kind of interactive format. If you look at the left on the website, you could click down on each particular portion of the guide and see what are the details on leadership, what are the details on teaching and learning, where the cursor is. And then when you click to each section, you can actually find the PDF that has the kind of more detailed guide, the 4 to 6 page document. So this is really important to note that these are all freely available. Everything is downloadable, and we would like you all to be in contact about trying to think around how to translate them or adapt them if English is not your preferred language. Let's talk. So that's a resource to keep in mind. What we'll spend time on now is answering some questions. So please put them in Q&A. I want to start off with a few of them that have come up and assign them to individual panelists. So I'll say a few of them at once, and then we'll kind of go popcorn style after that. So Peggy, I'd like you to respond to some of the questions that Anustup and Luis have made around what portion of that white box in the kind of the continuum of structured pedagogy are most effective, and how come everyone assumes that the structured pedagogy programs are all the way to the left. So you'll answer that one. Wendy, if you can answer the question about what the role of head teachers is on this. I'll actually give you another one, Wendy, which is around the balance between numeracy and literacy programs. Is this really just about literacy, or does this also apply for numeracy? Asia, you'll answer a question around digestible language. I think a lot of this focus on digestible language comes from you. So why is that important, and how do we do it? And then for this first round of questions, I'll ask Stephen to respond to Terry's question on the Q&A around the role of government. So if we can go in that order, just one by one, and then we'll get another round of questions after that. So starting with Peggy, then you'll just go after Peggy. And if all the panelists, sorry, Peggy, if all the panelists could turn on their videos. Thanks, Peggy.
So Ben asked, where do I see most of the programs falling within that white box of figure 6 from the literature review? We identified 5 models that we consider to be structured pedagogy, going from every word scripted for the teacher in the guide all the way to a menu of suggested activities. And what we are seeing, particularly on the map that was showed about where large scale structured pedagogy programs have happened in the last 5 to 10 years, I would say the majority of them are using actually a mix of probably some scripting for several weeks, and then maybe they're switching into steps with maybe off on the side some prescribed activities, or even a menu of suggested activities. So I guess I'm not really there. I would say if I had to pick, it's probably right smack in the middle. That's where we're seeing a lot, but we're also seeing a lot of success with, teachers who might have already know some of the methods that they want to be taught. Let's give them a menu and say, do some of these things. All of these things are beneficial. It's sort of like they've been vetted by the educators in that country to say, these are things we want you to do. And then you asked the second question and I forgot it. I didn't write it down. What was it?
No, you got it. You got it, Peggy. It was Luis and was asking, it's a very similar question I understood. So thanks. Wendy, I think you're next.
Sorry, I didn't know what the order was. Thank you. Okay, so I think I have 2 questions assigned to me. The first one was about school leadership, head teachers, or the role. I had seen that question in the Q&A. I think the role of school leadership in supporting teachers. And a couple things I'll say about this. First of all, is that it is very important to have school leaders involved. I talked about the idea of a teacher going back from training and they're the only one trying to do the new thing, and how difficult it makes it for them to do that. And I think the school leaders having an awareness and also understanding the importance of what the teachers are trying to do is important for also helping them to do it. Even if the school leader isn't playing a role of coach, which I'll get to in a second, but even if they're not playing that kind of role, being aware and being supportive of what the teachers are going to be doing is really essential. There are models for the teaching support where the head teacher plays the role of the coach and mentor. It's supposed to be observing and giving feedback, which is great, which is very ideal. But a lot of times we see that the head teachers are overloaded and don't necessarily have time to play that role. Often head teachers are teaching themselves. And so for in-school support mechanisms, it doesn't necessarily have to be the head teacher. There can be different structures. There might be another person in the school who's able to play that role. I've seen a lot of, in the program I'm working with in Nepal, where they have a sort of support structure, but different schools are actually doing it in different ways. So within that context, even within the one context, they might have different ways to do it. So I would say we want those school leaders to be involved and supportive, but they can't always necessarily be the coach. And then the other one was the balance between literacy and numeracy. Thank you for raising that. I think I might have seen Yasmin's name on that question, which thank you, Yasmin, for bringing it up. The guides do talk about both literacy and numeracy. I mean, pretty much everything is relevant for both. And throughout the guides, you'll see that we do talk about some things that are specific to literacy, especially in scope and sequence and materials development. There are some things that are specific to the two things. They can't be done exactly the same way, but there's overall the structured pedagogy approach fits and supports both of them. However, we have seen, when you look at the map, the large scale literacy programs, if you were to look just at the large scale numeracy programs, it would be a lot less. And I find that problematic, being a math teacher myself. So I hope that there will be, in fact, Yasmin had just shared recently an article, another research article showing evidence that those supporting both of them plays off of each other and strengthens both. So here's a push to get more numeracy out there. Thank you.
Is it me next?
Yes.
Yeah. And also a math teacher, Wendy, so shout out to your shouting out of mathematics. I think the question was about digestible language. We need to be better at producing evidence that has a much higher take up, and part of that is making language accessible. And my own background in the UK education system was we were prescribed to have used plain English, and we're actually directed to speak to parents. I don't even think the word structured pedagogy would have been allowed. But I think the question is more wider about being able to access research that is pertinent and how that's organized for the sector, so that's accessible. There's lots of people doing great things on language of instruction, on mathematics teaching, on special educational needs, gender. So being able to signal that, and I think here the work of the Global Education Advisory Panel will be very useful. But there are other sources to go to, like the Center for Global Development is doing research on education, the RISE, the FCDO-funded RISE program, USAID's own, and of course the World Bank. And what the intention of the science of teaching is to say, okay, what's the most pertinent? How do we bring it together in succinct, bite-sized, relevant ideas that people can digest? So none of the guides that you've heard, there's a lot you heard today, but none of them are more than 5 or 6 pages aside from the literature review. So it is something that the funders, the implementers, etc., want to have working knowledge of, but they shouldn't need a dictionary to say what's the difference between a phoneme and a phonics and orthography. So we're addressing on that point. That's me done.
Thanks, Asia. I think Stephen.
Thank you. I think the question was from Terry Giles, and it was a question about directed especially at those in government, and asking how do we accept that in a shift to competence-based education, you have to maybe remove some of the content to allow time to develop and spend time deepening the skill rather than just learning knowledge. I think it's a good question, and especially because in government, we tend to try to please multiple stakeholders. So it's very hard for government to cut things out and to say something is not a priority. Everything ends up being a priority because you have to do that to please all the stakeholders. So, and that applies, I think, in the area of curriculum as well. And I know that in our context in South Africa, the curriculum does get some critique that it is too full, I mean, it depends on the subject, but that it's too full and perhaps not enough time to go deep into particular topics. What's happened with the pandemic and with losing much of the school year is that we've kind of been forced into a situation where we've had to trim the curriculum substantially and have revised annual teaching plans that have been provided to schools. And many are now suggesting that this is actually an effective option going forward. So I think it's definitely raised the debate again. And as I said, it will probably depend on the subject, the extent to which a narrower, more trimmed curriculum will end up being appropriate. But perhaps this opportunity does afford the time to really relook at the issue. I know also that in the early grade literacy lesson plans that we've been developing as part of the structured pedagogy program, so we're testing and evaluating. Last year we had to adapt the lesson plans, and we're doing the same this year because we're expecting more teaching time to be lost. And I think the lesson plans also can help teachers, because teachers themselves have to figure out how to fit the curriculum into a shorter amount of time now. And of course, if there's coaching happening at schools as well, that provides even more interaction and opportunity for practical advice to teachers on how to adapt the curriculum to their context. So I think it's something, to answer your question again, it's not something we're good at. It's hard to accept this, but I think the current crisis has actually made it maybe a little bit easier. More people are open to the idea, I think, of at least investigating it in certain subjects.
Thanks, Stephen. That's great. So we want to take as many as we can. So I'm going to ask two things at once. I'm going to give a few questions kind of in a popcorn style. So you're going to answer just in 1 minute max. And then for anybody whose name I don't say amongst the panelists, please go to the Q&A and find a question you want to answer and answer it on the Q&A. So we'll kind of do two things at once. So Peggy has a very brief thing she wants to respond to from Padlet. That's number one. Number two, Rebecca, can you please respond to Gertrude's question about how do you do ongoing teacher support in the era of COVID-19? I know you're dealing with that a lot at USAID. Michael, can you talk about the question related to how the accelerator countries were selected? Wendy, there was a question from Sonia about the balance between training and support. How do you decide how to spend your money between training and support? And Joe, you had a question from both Nate and Patrick about sustainability and coherence, but keep in mind you're answering in 1 minute, Joe. And then I have two questions to answer if there's any time left. So we'll go in that order. Remember your number, one to five. Thanks.
I'm number one. The reason why earlier I thought there was a second question is I wanted to bring in a point that an anonymous person put in the tablet or in the Padlet, which I thought was really important. They mentioned that they're familiar with a school that uses the continuum of teacher autonomy for developing teachers. And I really applaud that. And I can imagine that that also being what might happen within a system. Maybe for 3 years, teachers are, a whole system is using, they're using more support, and then they start to move to less support, or maybe it's at a local level. But I just wanted to highlight that because I don't think once you're at a certain level, you need to stay there forever.
Thanks,
Is it in my number two, Ben?
Now you are, yes.
Okay, sorry. Okay, so you asked me to respond to Sonia's question about the balance between training and ongoing teacher support. And I completely agree, Sonia. You were talking about the ways in which support in the question, the ways in which support is more impactful, what you get in a training. As I mentioned, the teacher isn't gonna remember months later. I mean, there is a place for training, and that is a really good way to bring the teachers together and get them introduced to these new strategies and these new materials. You're probably not gonna like my answer, which is really, it depends. There's so much that is different from context to context that it's hard to say one answer, like always prioritize that or always prioritize the other thing. It depends on if it's a brand new structured pedagogy program or if you've been doing it for a while. If there are people already in that place that have been doing structured pedagogy and are familiar with it, then it would be much easier to do it primarily through kind of support mechanisms. But if everybody is new to it, you may need to do more of the startup training kind of thing. So it's hard to give one answer, though I do agree that the ongoing support has been underfunded. And I think that is something that people need to consider, that it's really, really key, and that often that's sort of left. In fact, you know, in the first question of what makes up structured pedagogy, the one that left off support still got a lot of votes, but it's really, really important. So just to get that plug, I suppose, but it does depend on context.
Thank you, Wendy. Michael, can you fit in here to talk about the accelerator country selection?
Sure.
Country, not county.
Thanks, Ben. Yeah, so the process, the discussions between the Gates Foundation and the World Bank, there a couple of things were important. I think the two main ones were starting with countries with high levels of learning poverty, highest levels of learning poverty, where there's really a type of crisis that needs addressing. But I think probably central was a political commitment on the part of the government, and there's assessments of the government's expression of the priority to address the problem, because in providing assistance, there's really great support for the government's programs. So I think I would say that these 5 countries that were judged to be places where those two factors were high, but also the bank is looking for other ways of supporting second generation of accelerators. So these 5 that were mentioned are in a first kind of cohort, and I think the foundation, the bank, and all partners are looking to go beyond what we have in this cohort.
Thanks, Michael. Joe, you'll be pithy in a minute, right?
I'm explaining how things are sustainable.
In a minute.
I don't think we have evidence yet, Patrick, in response to your question about which aspects of this have demonstrated themselves to be most sustainable. I think as programs are maturing, that's really an area for us to pay close attention to. I would go back to some of what I had said earlier about the importance of job descriptions and making like permanent changes in the way the system is structured. So that's an aspect of a permanent change. I think you've seen some of the sustainability in Jordan in terms of things being incorporated into how teachers are certified and what teacher professional standards look like. So there are elements of system aspects, sort of permanent features of the landscape that these programs are beginning to influence in important ways. And I think that will contribute to sustainability, but I can't say that we have evidence at this point about that.
Thanks, Joe. That was great. So just a couple wrap-ups. Please do go to the website. The request I would make is to not be a PDF hoarder. I happen to be somebody who downloads lots of PDFs and sticks them in a folder, and I will admit doesn't read all of them, but the people on this panel have actually tried really hard to make these readable from the outset, so you would persist through the end. So please do check them. We're hoping that these guides will help structure and lead new programs at the policymaker level, help implementers learn from each other about what works. Maybe your colleague organization has learned something that might be beneficial. We hope these will influence program design to improve the quality of how programs are implemented, and also how finances are spent. So to think about what happens next, under the guidance of Dr. Asia at Gates, we are moving forward from these to work on some new documents around practical language of instruction choices. There were some questions about language. Not that we're going to have all the answers, but we will be addressing that in the next one. How to use assessment in the classroom, how to create a system of assessment, pre-service, math, and program design. And in general, the next step for the study after we do all that would be to look forward to partnering with some of you organizations to think about practical places to implement research on how to improve pedagogy at small scale. So maybe you have a large scale foundational literacy and numeracy program where we could test out along with you some pedagogical improvement, instructional change methods. We look forward to doing that next. Apologies for not answering all the questions, but there will be some follow-up to you. We'll be sending you a poll in a minute for you to reach out back to us. And there's our email address. Maybe you can show that, Julianne, as we close. And as we close, thanks so much for coming today, for Gates Foundation for designing and funding this work, the advisory committee for guiding us and being so supportive and making the right changes as we've gone along. And thanks so much for your participation. We look forward to hearing from you about how to work together to help improve the quality of education dramatically in the countries we love so much. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.